Hi, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of Ramblemancy. Tonight, we're joined by Justice Arman. Justice, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Um, Before we get into tonight's episode, which is about engaging with TTRPGs, we have a few announcements, some of which are brand new. No, I'm sorry, none of them are brand new. Some of which are brand new as of like a couple days ago. So if you were here for Infinite Horizon on Wednesday, you heard some of this already. But the most important one so far is that those of you who've been around for a bit know that we were planning a charity uh, campaign for the second half of this month that would have started already. This week would have started, but due to some technical issues with Tiltify and the campaign that we were going to be working on with the human rights campaign, we ended up not being able to do it this month, and we had to push back 1 month. So we're still going to do it. All of the same stuff is going to be there, but just a month later and with a different charity. So we're going to be discussing that this week, and we'll have information as to which charity we're going to be doing fundraising for next month. Probably sometime next week or the week after, so you'll know that. But otherwise, everything else, the plan is still the same. We're still going to do our regular streams and things like that with additional incentives, as well as the Mall Kids one shot that's set in the Infinite Horizon universe to cap the whole thing off. So um, we'll make sure that you all have all the information that you need about that as soon as we have it ready for you. So keep an eye out on Discord and on Twitter and things like that for that information. Um, of course, this very show, Ramblemancy, is starting to be released on YouTube. So all of our backlog of Ramblemancy that we've had since going remote due to the pandemic are being uploaded to YouTube so that you can watch them as many times as you like. And they'll be uploaded in 5 to 8 episode chunks every week until we're current, and then they'll go to like the standard one weekly episode, as well as just like the rest of our other shows. So that is another thing that is happening. Hopefully, In Too Deep will be back this week on Tuesday. We've got some like technical issues to work out, but otherwise, barring that, your favorite chaotic dungeon delvers will return on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. So not to worry there. I think those are all of our big ones. I don't think we have.
I think that
I think
is
that's
it
yeah. Those are
for
all of them
now.
for
That's it.
now.
That's it for the moment.
Cool. Well, then let's go ahead and get into tonight's discussion. John, what do you think? What are you thinking about?
I every week I know that you're going to throw me under the bus, and then I just like I don't know how I managed to I just sit here and listen to you do your announcement spiel, and I'm just like along for the ride, like, oh yeah, we have a Discord,
Just
and
lulling you in. I'm pulling you in with my uh, dulcet tones, lulling you into a false sense of security,
there's
and then
something just like oddly soothing about listening to the beginning of the stream like announcements roll. Or something that just like lulls me into this false sense of complacency, and so that every time you're like, John, what do we got? And just
I'm
I'm
like, I
shocked
don't
out
know,
of
what
it.
do we got?
What are we doing again?
I actually think I do have a question,
Sure, sure.
which I know when we were thinking about, like when we were starting to think about like the topic for this episode, one of the things that we were thinking about is like ways that games get us to buy in, like the way that they're written or mechanics, or whether that's tactile things. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is Monty Cook Games is like big black box.
Yeah.
I can't. What's the name of the game?
Invisible Sun.
Thank you. I knew it was. I couldn't remember what the adjective
Hmm.
was. Invisible Sun comes to mind, but I was just wondering, like, what's your favorite way that a game has ever gotten you to like buy in or
Well,
like to
I,
kind of like feel immersed in it?
I would. I want to. That's a really excellent question, but I want to hold off on that for just a second,
Mhm.
because I know, Justice, you work for Beadle and Grimms, correct?
Mhm.
And Beadle and Grimms has a lot of like tactile things for your games, is right? Like they
Yep.
so like what
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a good way of tying that into this question. So like uh yeah, I mean if you wanna kind of talk a little bit about some of that, I think that some of that
Yeah,
stuff
let me
that
get
seems
one.
really cool. Yeah, absolutely. Oh man. Also, Age of Fit says literally following the bus schedule, and John still can't avoid it.
So this is
Oh,
the one we released for
Whoa.
Icewind Dale. This was
Ooh.
the platinum edition that we did for that.
oh my God, that's
Whoa.
such a pretty
So
box.
I first met Bill Rahor, one of the founders of Beadle and Grimms, at Gen Con 2018.
Ooh.
Also, today is the first day of the Persian New Year. I'm Iranian. I feel like I should say
Yeah.
Nowruz Mubarak to everyone, which is Happy New Year's. So
Oh.
I like that because so far
Awesome.
2021 hasn't been amazing.
Yeah.
Especially
Right.
this week has been terrible. If
Yeah.
you caught into that, you can go to napawf.org and donate to
Yes.
stop violence against Asian Americans. So I'm happy that today's the new year because I feel like we already kind of need a reset.
Yeah,
But
no kidding. And
Yeah.
anyway, so this is our box for the platinum edition. We put all kinds of things in this. Basically, our whole pitch of our company is to like provide a high quality immersive experience for you and your players while cutting down on your prep. So when I met them in 2018, it was actually before they had released Waterdeep Dragon Heist and the adventure hadn't come out yet. So they couldn't show what was actually going to come out in the box because of the NDA. So they were trying to allude to all the stuff you might get in the box without actually showing you what you get. But for example, some of this stuff, we have different map tiles for Icewind Dale
cool.
that
Ooh.
we make so that if you want to, say that the characters are going inside someone's house or you're running one of the bonus encounters we put in here, stuff like that. But the thing that immediately gets me and that usually gets a lot of the people is the jewelry. Because what we do is we make physical pieces that are based off content in the book. So one of the factions in there is the Arcane Brotherhood. And we have a pin that you can use that's based
Ooh.
off of their design. It will never focus. It's just going to keep wanting my face.
Yeah.
But anyway, but what's cool is you can actually wear it. And if you want to sport a super evil wizard organization on the regular, you can do that.
That's so cool.
But yeah, so we make these super big boxes that are kind of, when you said the Invisible Sun one, they are very similar, I would say, in that sort of same vein of immersive handouts on, in world
Yeah.
paper, that sort of stuff.
God,
So yeah, that is what I do for a living.
that's that stuff is so cool. I love having like tactile things in TTRPGs. It's one of the things that I miss about playing in person is just having like physical handouts. Like in our home game, Freeman's in my home game, there was one point where like a character found a letter that was addressed to him, and I like actually typed out like a letter using like handwriting font and handed it to him in the game. And so I love that kind of stuff. It just adds a whole other dimension to the sort of shared imagination game, right? Like it's just a whole new level of dimensionality to it.
Yeah, the GMs who make props, I have so much respect for because it is so hard to make props and it takes so much time and they don't. I mean, while your players like them a lot, as far as the time that they take up at a session, they can be either a long time or
Yeah.
boop done. But it always brings a smile to my players' faces and stuff.
Yeah, and that's what Geek Out's in the chat is saying right now. The way your players' eyes light up when you pull out a prop, it's very true. Like I love that moment. Um, I don't know if I have done this, but I will again because it's relevant again. But a while back, like in our home game, I made like a big sort of set piece terrain for a scene for a battle that I knew was coming in our game because I just could picture the scene so well, and drawing it on a two-dimensional like dry erase surface just didn't feel right. So I physically built it, and I just remember the best part about that was not how cool the battle was, but like people's faces when I like took the cloth off of it and like this is what we're doing today. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Super cool. Devin and Dustin from D4,
Hmm.
they make a lot of their own terrain, and it always blows me away how good those look. I think they make it out of foam core or something, but it
Hmm.
looks like it's from resin and it's painted so well. It's
Yeah.
super cool.
Oh God, that's one of my favorite things. Is like making terrain. Like I know a lot of people get really into mini painting. I personally hate mini painting because I'm very bad at it. But and like I just get frustrated. But painting terrain is and building terrain is like it's one of my favorite things. I yeah, ah, so cool.
Yeah, I can imagine the miniatures are so small, the attention to detail and the carefulness and the proper brush. But when you're doing like a terrain, it's like a little more like it's less like that, but you can also work with shading and work with
Yes,
detail and like
it's a
shadowing,
lot more
especially like
forgiving.
hmm
It's a lot more
yeah.
forgiving than miniatures.
To a
And you
certain
can have so
extent.
much fun too, grabbing like real stuff from like outside, like little bits of gravel or sand from the beach, or maybe not the beach because yeah, but like sand to actually make that
Yeah.
texture on the ground
Pro
too.
tip: aquarium pebbles.
Oh
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Just
good idea.
yeah,
That
that's
takes me back to like the days in middle school where like we would have to like make things for projects and like the old trick of getting like sand or dirt or something like that to fill out a beach and using like hairspray or something to get it all to like stick down or stay there. There's much more effective ways to do that like now, but I remember using that particular method when I was making I think like I was making Bilbo's Hobbit hole, and boy, that was a time like building a hillside out of like
Yeah.
resin soaked like cloth like laid over it and then painted. And I think that to this day is probably I'm gonna have to dig up some pictures of that at some
Yeah, you
point.
should. That sounds really cool.
yeah,
But yeah, I made it for like an eighth grade book report project.
yeah.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
I hope you got a good grade.
yeah, I
Yeah.
Sounds like
did.
you put in
I
a lot of work. You deserved one.
Yeah. My dad did a lot of woodworking and stuff when I was a kid, and he built model airplanes and stuff, and so he was kind of familiar with that process of like of stretching cloth over stuff like that. And so
Hmm.
like he kind of like helped me plan it out and then execute all of it.
Cool.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to think now, though, like going back to your question, John, I'm kind of trying to go back and think about if I've ever experienced that in other games. And I don't know that I know the other games have it. I just don't know that I've ever personally experienced, like, the kind of tactile things other than stuff I've brought in personally. Like, I know
Mhm.
with when I was playing Star Trek Adventures, when I was running Star Trek Adventures, they have the, like, threat and momentum as, like, GM and player resources, respectively. And one of the things that I did is I'd bring in those little like the little glass beads that like that often you find in bowls just on for decoration or whatever, and I used
Mhm.
those as because like yeah, I suppose on you could write down numbers to represent threat and momentum and resources, but it's so much more interesting when you can physically move something and say, okay, I'm going to spend this resource, and you can physically move it. So I don't know that to answer your question, I don't know that I've actually experienced any games that have props and or tactile things that come with them other than ones I bring in, right? Um, so yeah.
Hmm.
There's a game by Fantasy Flight. We've been playing, me and my wife. They're the Sherlock boxes.
Okay.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think there's 4 different boxes, and you go and you solve some of these famous cases of Sherlock, and in them there are like there's like a directory of people, and there's a big map, and you turn to certain pages, but it's really cool because you are really immersed in it while you're doing it. But also you feel like you're actually there solving the cases. You're like, oh, okay, so here's a newspaper, and in the newspaper today there's something on like bundt cakes, and we found this bundt cake pan, at this scene, maybe we should go talk to that baker. And you turn to this, you find out the directory where the baker lives. There's 3 bakers. You decide to go to them that way. And when you go to those pages, it like role plays out what happens with you all. If there's a lead, it might give you a letter that gives you more information at a later place when you come back, or and it's really cool.
That's so awesome.
You can play with like 2 to 8 people or something like that.
That's like the wildest, like, I think spin-off or like branch of Clue that I think I've ever heard. That sounds so cool. Like having all of the different like elements, and then like and kind of like solving the mystery for yourself, like, and then being able to be a part of those role-playing encounters too. Sounds super fun.
I think in the box you play these kids, or I don't know, maybe they just always sound like kids because they're like their speech is written in like Cockney accents and all that, and you're working with Watson, and you can tell Watson doesn't really like them very much, but Sherlock is a character in it, so you can try to beat Sherlock. But at the end, you see how fast Sherlock solves everything. It's like, Sherlock solved this case in 5 leads, and you've got like a sheet of paper with 30 people on it that you've talked to, all these dead ends and all this. You're like, that's bull. No, he didn't.
He did not.
It's unreal.
I would like to check Sherlock's work, please.
Right. It's like Sherlock knew that through this association, Sherlock knew the Greek language. And because Sherlock knows the Greek language, he knows that alpha is synonymous with this person's left pinky. And so he went there next. And you're like,
It's like the experience.
I don't see how those dots connect.
That's basically how we always feel when we're reading Sherlock's digression.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it's like the experience of playing a video game, and then you beat it, and you're like, all right, that was a pretty good time. And then you go and look up a speed run of it, which is a thing that I have done before to myself. And then I'm like, that's not fair. How did you beat this in 20 minutes?
Right.
Yeah.
Those people who are playing Mario 64 and they're jumping at precisely the right corner to...
Yeah, like the frame perfect, pixel perfect, like kick Yoshi into the abyss, double jump, like...
Or like when you're doing... any kind of timed kind of game, right? When you look up the high scores for times and stuff like that, and you're like, how? I was proud of my time. How did they? What?
Right.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay, so here's another thing that I think is pretty interesting about like kind of engaging with TTRPGs, because this is a pretty broad topic, because we can sort of, right now we're kind of talking about the the ways, like we're talking a little bit about immersion at the table a little, right? And engaging different senses, but that's not just limited to stuff that you can bring out in gameplay. It's also atmosphere is a big part of it too. So like I'm curious, because what and this is a question for chat as well, if any of you have some cool stuff. I think I remember some stories that some of you have told before, but what are some cool immersive things that you've done or experienced in a TTRPG that have really enhanced the game or that have stuck with you?
I think I've told this story on stream before, but it has been a long time, so I'll tell it again. And it's one of my favorite things that I've ever done as a GM. But I had designed like basically like the first 4 or 5 episodes of a homebrew D&D game, and they were essentially like chasing this trail of leads into a swamp. And they came to this like old ruined fort, in the dungeons of which there was this necromancer in the act of like raising some of the kobolds that they had killed, like a few of his minions that they had killed a few days earlier. And I found a really good music track a few days earlier, and I was like, ooh, this is too good not to use. And so I wrote out a piece of narration for like as they stepped into the room, describing the room and like what they saw upon entering, and then like what he was up to. And I timed it I timed myself reading it so that just as the music hit like the climax, like the dramatic thing in the scene happened. I practiced it a few times before to make sure I could nail the timing, and that's like maybe my favorite thing that I have ever done as a GM with music is that. Because just the look on my players' like faces was this combination of this is so fucking cool and we're so dead. Like,
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a lot of music for mine. I would share my screen and show you my OneNote if I wasn't afraid that I would accidentally reveal like an NDA or something on the screen. But no, I have a really long list of music. I'll listen to like Pandora or just let YouTube roll with the auto suggestions on like epic villain music or whatever. When I find a song, I'll grab it and I'll write down things about the mood or what it could possibly be used for, and I'll save it for like a year and never touch it until I'm like, oh, this would be perfect for this time. But yeah, we have Sirenscape at our table, so I'm always using Sirenscape for just general stuff. And then tabletopaudio.com I think is free, and there's like a Patreon if you want to support that creator, and it's awesome.
We're big fans of tabletop audio here. We use Tim's sounds all the time, and they're very good. And yeah.
I remember when that website was like all on one page and there was no scrolling, and now I go on there, I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a lot to choose from.
And like because he's got those the sound pads where you can sort of like create your own scenes, but he releases then he also does like the 10-minute soundscapes, right? And he has one of those every single week now. Like every week there's a new one on Wednesdays. I know this because that's when we run Infinite Horizon. So like every Wednesday morning, part of my routine for prep is to go, all right, what did Tim put out today? And I'll go and look.
That's awesome.
Is it useful? No, this is more fantasy. All right, well, all right.
Bookmark.
Bookmark
For later.
Yeah. Later.
earmark that one for later.
Yeah. Oh, this week was a Candlekeep one. That is very appropriate.
Ooh.
Yeah. There's
I was like, wait, he said Candlekeep, Candle Deep.
Candle Deep.
To avoid to avoid any associations you might feel with the popular library in a role playing game.
He did the same with
Waterdeep.
Waterdeep is Waterkeep or something.
I think it's Waterkeep.
Waterkeep and Candle Deep, which I
Oh no.
I love it. The Sea of Moving Ice.
Yeah. No, he does
some of these though, Underdark and Feywild. I guess those are like open source.
They must be. But yeah, no, there's such good stuff he's got there. Sounds and music are big. I know, like Caitlin in Infinite Horizon. Caitlin, when she runs her own games and when she's playing in games, she's like, I need to have music. If I don't have music, I can't engage. And that's a bit. I mean, I just like having music. I don't like. For me, it's not like a necessity, but it is. So it's interesting to me the different levels to which people require, and like, other senses, right, to engage with TTRPGs.
I think that's kind of what's hard about playing online is if you're streaming, you cut yourself off from so much good music because it's not like where you're at your table and you can play any song. It's just you and 4 other players. You have to make sure everything you're playing is openly sourced. So you're not, taking somebody's music and profiting from it. So that's an interesting complication I hadn't really thought about until now.
Yeah, that was one of the big things that just when we started streaming TTRPGs, I was like, heartbroken that there were so many perfect tracks that I had in my library for various things that I just couldn't use.
Just scrolling, looking at them fondly, like, okay.
I've been able since one of the things. This is a pro tip for anybody out there who is streaming TTRPGs. Where I've found a lot of the music that I use for Infinite Horizon has actually been through Humble Bundles, where occasionally they'll offer royalty-free music that includes a license for their music that you can use for anything in the bundle, for any kind of for like a game, for video games that you're working on, for for streams, video projects, things like that. And that's where I've gotten a lot of my music for Infinite Horizon. And I'm sure there's a lot of other good music in there that I have ignored in the bundles that I've gotten that I have ignored because they don't specifically pertain to what I need them for.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that there's ones that are good in there for like any number of things. So yeah, that's a tip for anybody who's streaming music is keep an eye on the humble bundles, because occasionally they'll have those huge music bundles that are really, really useful.
Yeah, that's cool.
Also, hello, Olivia. Olivia has joined us in the chat. Welcome.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. So, Freeman, I'm wrong, but you looked like you had something you were going to say earlier about.
Oh yeah, I was just like stringing together some things. I was trying to remember. I mean, there was one time I played a game where we just had candlelight because it's no electricity in the game, which is kind of annoying when you're trying to look at a character sheet, but I wouldn't recommend it. But I think two things. I think I love costumes in a game, and especially when you do it as like a themed thing. For instance, like Halloween comes around, you're like, hey, let's get dressed up, everybody. Yeah. But I think most importantly, and I think I remembered this, that I really like systems that are so simplistic that you just don't use anything except like theater of the mind. And I'd kind of forgotten about that until we suddenly were cut off from our home game, and now we're here, and I only have the props I have, and that's dice, you know? Yeah. So it's really like all about the performative aspect now, and the role-playing aspect, I suppose.
Well, dice in the cone.
Dice in the
Is that still within reach?
Oh, man.
Yep, there it is.
From the Redwoods.
Perfect. Yep.
I don't know why I keep smelling it. Like I expect it to like suddenly smell like pine sap or something.
It's sprouting, Freeman. It's becoming a tree.
Well, that would be nice. It is. I do live in a treehouse community, after all.
I mean, there is tree, there is house. There you go. What more do you need? Oh man, I'm trying to think if like. See, because most of my experience has been as a GM, so anything that I've experienced in terms of other ways of immersing people in the game is stuff that I have generally done, and most of that is through soundscapes and music, and once or twice when I've made a prop or something like that. But there was that time, Freeman, you mentioned like Halloween or whatever. I remember when we did like that. We took a break from our regular D&D campaign, and we did sort of like a zombie apocalypse style one, and we were like dressed like apocalypse survivors, and like that was fun, because it, like, I don't know, for me at least as the GM, it added a whole other level of dimensionality where I just felt like I was like, yes, I am wearing what the people in this setting would be wearing, and it just felt, I don't know, it brought me into it a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's important for I feel like a post-apocalyptic or a zombie game to kind of, if you're willing and want to, the more immersed the better, I think, in that kind of game. Get really spooky and like, oh, I feel like I haven't showered in like 2 weeks. All right, I'm ready to go and
right, yeah. If you're playing a game in post-apocalypse, just don't shower for several weeks in preparation, and that'll make the game much more immersive. Not particularly enjoyable, but immersive.
That's one of the benefits to online play.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And to online conventions. There's not that particular like con floor smellscape.
Yeah. Edgeofit says, I would suggest bear traps that could really spice the game up. No, don't do that. Don't do
Ouch.
that.
Oh gosh.
Don't do that.
Hello, Koala.
So I guess one way that I engage my players on a weekly basis is with our roleplay warm-ups. I post them on Fridays on Twitter every Friday. And usually what I do is the whole philosophy behind it is to basically give you a chance to think about what your character would do in any situation or some aspect that you don't traditionally think about them. And I try to theme them after something that's going to be in the game. So we start all of our sessions off of with a role play warm up and a recap. So we do the recap, then we do the role play warm up, and whoever's we like best, if we like two, we give them inspiration based on it. So some of them are, fun things like, what's the best meal your character has ever eaten, and it really gets you thinking because your character is more than your character sheet. It's more than the numbers on there. And whenever you end up in a place in a session where you go you say you go into a tavern, you're looking for something to eat. Well, your players already answer that question. They know what their favorite food is. They know what the best meal was. They know why they liked it. And I feel like it helps all of our players get into character before the game.
Yeah.
Kind of settles them into the mood. And sometimes I try to be really sneaky with it. And if there's going to be a theme in this session, and I know that they're going to get to this part, I'll ask a question kind of gearing them for that moment. And I've found that on the sessions where that applies, the moments and the arcs and the responses that the characters do for each other are more, they're not better, they're different, but they're more invested because they've had time to get in the moment before the moment happened. I know improv is super difficult. It's something I think everyone struggles with improv. But these roleplay warm-ups every Friday, every Saturday, they've been very helpful. For example, we play Avernus, so one of them is describe your character's personal hell. And the answers that they use for that, they might factor into a devil trying to scare a character out of violating the terms of their agreement. And it's pretty cool.
Oh my gosh, that sounds really really cool. That's such a good idea. Now, sorry, my GM brain just like took over and started running, and I'm like, let's see, how can I do this? And yeah.
It's interesting, Lucas, because like we've talked about this world building for Infinite Horizon, which is like a homebrew setting for our Wednesday actual play. And that's something that Lucas and Caitlin and I have been writing for a long time. And there's a lot of things that's easy to just be like, oh yeah, no, like if we need to make up foods, for instance, we can just like make up in-universe foods whenever we need them in the moment. And the reality is that like it's so much better to have thought about those things in advance. And so like that's what that makes me think of, because like if you have thought about what your character would order at a tavern, or like what your character this was a silly question that somebody asked in our D&D chat a couple of weeks ago, but was like, what's your character's boba order? And like that it was a silly question that we all sort of like joked about, but at the same time I also was like, okay, but actually what is it? And then I was like, why do they like it? Is it because like what flavors do they like, and like kind of thinking along those things. So it's like, so what other foods does my character like then? Like what kind of things would she sit down at a bar and order?
And that's kind of like, that kind of goes along perfectly with what you were just saying, Justice, which is like that having those prompts to think about ahead of time makes it so much easier. Like sure, in theory, anybody could in the moment come up with something kind of cool and interesting for like what's their favorite food, but it's sort of counterintuitively thinking about it, and like if it exists already, if it's something that you've already thought of, then you're going to use that detail. You're much more likely to use that detail as opposed to.
And you can use it in other things.
Yeah.
I mean, if you know your character's favorite flower, your character might not go buy a bouquet, but if you end up seeing that flower in the wild, it's more meaningful for your character. It could be a source of joy for them if they really like tulips and they see a tulip and tulips make them happy, or if they like, a certain type of rose because there's a moment in their past where either, they laid that flower on somebody's grave that they loved, or it was given to them by somebody who is still kind of an old flame in a town. Like it reminds them of that. I think it makes your characters feel more like people when you can think of them. We've been rewatching The Office lately. It's probably my favorite show. I've watched it so many times. But in watching some of the deleted scenes and listening to the commentary, seeing what they took out, there's a scene where Karen, you ever watch The Office?
Bits and pieces of it.
Bits and pieces.
Yeah.
There's a scene where this person, Karen, is sort of like caught in this love triangle, and she's mad. And there's another character, Pam, who's about to do an art show. And there's this scene where she walks into the kitchen and sees a poster for her art show. And she goes to tear it down. And they took this scene out. And she doesn't tear it down because someone walks out of the bathroom right at that time. And I kept thinking to myself, why are they taking these scenes out? And if they had left that in, how would I feel about that character? Just that little detail of Karen taking this down, that hateful kind of thing of, it doesn't feel like something her character would do. And that's because they decided to portray her as someone who is more often nice, brushes things off, kind of cool-headed. And those little details in aggregate, they make the character who they are. And I think it's so interesting to watch some of these scenes. And just thinking about someone like Rainn Wilson, who plays Dwight, plays this beet farmer. He's so weird. He's all of these different elements of his character that get developed over time, that he's talks with like Pennsylvania Amish, but he's also got his own farm, but he's also kind of a businessman, the best salesman.
Yeah.
And I think about, what is it like for Rainn to play this person? He has things that are obviously very different about Dwight. His political views are different from this character, but he knows how his character is or isn't going to respond to certain situations. And I think that makes it more fun to play a character that's distinct from you. And I wonder if times he doesn't like the character he's playing because those views are different.
Yeah. That's
super
really
interesting to me.
Yeah, no, like that's really interesting.
It's like, if you could take your character now, I mean, everything we do live, if you could take out moments of your campaign and do them over again, what would be the deleted scenes for your character? Because your character is made in your image. It's what you want them to be. But I mean, we're SNL, not, The Office.
Yeah.
Everything, once it comes out, it's there. And you really can't take it back unless your table is okay with that. I have a blog article on like, can I get a redo, which is about saying, oh, wait, I don't want to have said that. Can we redo that? And that's the new canon. And I think that's how most tables should be, is so that you get to own who your character is, that you don't, it's not, once you've said this thing, you can't take it back. And it's interesting to think about who would we want our characters to be if we had had an hour to think about the moment that was going to happen at the table. If when the villain offered us, to join them, and we said no because we're being heroic, and you think about it later, you're like, well, what would my character, in what circumstance would they have joined, and how would this be differently if they did? I think it's cool.
Yeah. Oh God. Sorry, I'm just processing all of that, because
I kind of want to write a thread about this now, because
Yeah.
I think I didn't think about the deleted scenes in D&D until now. And
just
it's interesting.
Just the question, what are your character's deleted scenes, is so interesting to me. Like, that's such a thought-provoking question. Is like thinking back on all those times, like sitting in character as like, oh, if this happens, like I know it's going to happen, and like those things never play out. But like, or like the number of things where you prepare for an instance that doesn't necessarily happen in the way that you expect it to. And so like those kind of just like fall by the wayside or don't happen.
Yeah.
But like it's interesting to entertain like seriously those kind of like what ifs, or like the little things that might have been about your character, like if something had gone just a little bit differently.
Yeah.
If the dice
No, you keep going. Sorry to interrupt.
I was just going to say, like, if the dice had landed differently, or if another player had said something or not said something, like.
Yeah, I think of that. And then the other thing I would think about with this is the idea of like, what plots got abandoned, and would they have mattered? I think about Breaking Bad. In the first couple seasons, one of the characters, Marie, she has a problem with stealing. And after like the third season, they hardly ever touch on that plot point again. It's one of the few abandoned plot points in that whole show. They reference it, I think, 1 or 2 times in the last season, that she knows a therapist, and that might be the person. I think that person is because of this tendency she has to steal things that doesn't, I guess it's kleptomaniac is the term for it, but I'm not sure if that's the right term. But yeah, I think about that. Like, what are the plots that got abandoned for my character? Those quest hooks that never really got acted on, and why did your character abandon them? Would they have mattered? I don't know.
Well, and
That's cool.
as a GM, I think about that particular thing all the time, right? Because there's so many times where I'm like, where I'll come into something thinking I have an idea of where this is going, and then as I'm doing it, it comes out at the table, and I'll seed plot hooks or seed an adventure or something like that, and then afterwards I'll go, after the game is over, I'm like, I don't really like the direction this is going, and or maybe I'll see it once it has played out. I'll see it in a different light and go, ooh, that makes me slightly uncomfortable. Maybe that's not a good idea. And then I'll like veer off, right? And but that there's no way of stopping the what if brain, right? The like, what would that have looked like if it had played out, you know? Like or
That would actually be a really cool session to do in your group, is to say,
yeah.
hey, we're going to do a what if one shot, and I want you to
Ooh.
make your characters over again. I mean, Marvel's doing that what if series.
Right, that's exactly what I was just
super
thinking
fun.
about. Yeah.
But yeah, maybe it's like, yeah, what if so and so had said yes to this character, and they'd be like, obviously you'd be playing someone different. So why don't you make a different character, and your character is going to be the new villain that they're trying to fight. That'd be cool.
That's
like
so
that.
cool.
I think that's a one shot people would get excited for. Like some one shots when you're like, your DM is really overworked, or somebody wants to try something, or you're not sure, you kind of just want to play, even though everybody wants to take a night off. I think a what if scenario, you're like, oh, it's still kind of relevant though.
That is
you could
really
have like
cool.
maybe like Community has how there's that other dimension, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
think they cross over at some point, whatever the darkest timeline.
Yeah.
With where Chevy Chase's character dies
That's
because
right.
of the pizza and the gun and the
Oh my god.
the purse. Gosh,
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good idea.
I need to write these down because
Yeah, no kidding.
I've been taking notes as we've been talking about.
I'll ask you to send them to me maybe, because I don't know where my pen is.
And I wrote down like the what are the deleted scenes for your characters, and then I just wrote the words "what if one shot?" ?
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to chat for a second because I saw a couple of cool things. I saw where too far. I might have scrolled too far.
Olivia mentioned something interesting, which is that she takes like her what ifs from her head, like the things that don't happen in game, and then turns them, like writes them into docs afterwards. And that's something that I do a lot. Like a lot of times if I'm like, this could go very wrong, and then it doesn't, because like the dice or like player resource expenditure, kind of turns it in the direction of the heroic again, because that's like a kind of a baseline for a lot of popular like fantasy games and stuff like that is heroic fantasy, or like
Right.
or especially like with a lot of the Cypher games have been playing superheroes, which always things tend to turn out well. But I do like to think about those moments sometimes, and then when I'm laying in bed trying to sleep, I will a lot of times wind up grabbing my phone and just sitting there like tapping into the notes in my phone or a new Google Doc, like what might have been. And those make for some very interesting little like stories or scenes or images that are fun to write down.
And it makes sense too, like thinking about those moments, because I mean, how many times have you had in a campaign a situation where like a character, player or otherwise, this is sort of a dramatic and very extreme example, but like maybe they die, and whether or not they come back, right, in D&D Resurrection and all that sort of stuff, whether or not they come back, that changes how everybody else, like the trajectory of other characters. Like if there's a character that was close to that one character, like the classic example is Critical Role with Vax and Vex's death, right, in campaign 1, where suddenly he becomes a servant of the Raven Queen because of that moment, and that informed everything else from that moment on, right? Like you can see the spider webs of that throughout the entire rest of the campaign, and there's so many of those moments in a campaign where something dramatic happens, whether as a result of die rolls or just player choices, that just branches everything off. Like there's a clear split where something changed. Those are those moments that would be so fascinating to go back to and say, what if that one pivotal thing had changed? And man, I mean, I
Yeah.
realize I'm just reiterating what everybody has said already, but like I'm just so fascinated by this idea. Like I'm just processing it by talking about it.
No, I think that's really cool.
Mhm.
There was a character, there's a barbarian named Kov in our we did a level 1 to 20 campaign, and this character actually got inherited by a different player. It was really interesting to see that happen because I originally helped to make this character with somebody else who uh had things come up in life, had to transfer out, and somebody came and had played his character a couple times. It kind of at any point, all of us had kind of played this character at some point. So we were all kind of attached to him. Somebody comes over, this guy wasn't there. His daughter plays Kov for a while and gives a little bit of color to Kov in that way. I'm playing Kov sometimes because he always, this is back when I was like, I wasn't sure I could just fade a character into the background. I always felt like it needed to have a reason. And eventually someone came and they became more of a regular player, and they started by playing Kov, very typical Goliath barbarian, strong, kind of moody, that sort of thing. But he added so much to that character. And there was this whole side plot that happened when his brother, who's this Goliath sorcerer, and he was trying to do something totally different. And it was one of those quest hooks that just it showed up a couple times, but the main quest was so pressing that they decided to focus on that. And so when they beat that campaign, it was like level 12 or 13. And I asked them what they wanted to do. And they said, we want to keep going to 20. And of course, there are no adventure books that go past 20. I was like, oh, gosh, I got to write a whole campaign to take them to 20 now. I've never done this. And it started with that, with the what if this brother had not been impeded in all this time and all these months that they were focusing on the other thing, what was happening with this character? And so I took the times that they did, all the travel time, and I thought, okay, he'd been here and here and here. And so we kicked off this new campaign, and he had achieved most of his goals because they were literally on the other side of the continent. And it was really interesting that when they got to this one section, the player who was playing Kov decided to face his brother alone. And they were literally running from this brother because he was so powerful. It was the end of the dungeon, and they were running to teleport out with this ally. And everybody joined hands, and he decided not to teleport. So they all went, and I knew that this was going to happen. And he actually joined hands with someone and left a note in their hand. And so he turned, and he ended up dying at that point, and they went on for like 3 or 4 levels before he was ever found and resurrected. But it's interesting to think, what if he hadn't done that? Would they have gone back? Would they have all stayed? And it could make for a really cool situation. Anyway,
Man, I'm really fascinated by this whole concept of the what ifs of TTRPGs.
I wonder how you would do that. How would you even do that session? Like what would it look like? You'd have to assume some things, right? You'd have to like give them a primer, like you didn't stop this bad guy, you didn't get there in time, it's 1 month later,
Yeah, remember that time that you counterspelled their plane shift? What if you hadn't? Right?
Yeah.
Like now
You rolled a 1.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder if it would be easy. I mean, I'm sure it would be easier to do it with those big moments, right? Like the branching moments, like I mentioned earlier, rather than just like what you mentioned with like the counterspell that one time when you did this, right? Unless, of course, the counterspell is a branching moment, like somebody just narrowly avoids getting plane shifted in the middle of a battle, right? Like that. I'm wondering. It would probably be a lot easier in those pivotal moments that just change the entire course of the campaign, where you look back and go, wow, none of this would have happened if not for that one moment, right? And every campaign has one of those, at least one.
I'm bet if other players are anything like me as a player, everyone has at least one moment from like even a few sessions of playing a game, or like a medium to long term game, where they're like, there's this one little thing where I really felt like this settled me into my character, or like this was when I really felt like at home and I knew who this character was. And so like I feel like you could almost ask your players, like, what's a moment where if things had gone differently, your character wouldn't have turned out the way they had. And that might be an interesting way, just like to
Yeah.
like let them hand you some of the ammunition for that one.
Well, and that
Their
kind of,
turning point kind of
yeah,
thing.
that kind of goes along with
Mhm.
what Koala just said in chat, which is I don't think it's off topic at all, Koala. Uh, that reminds me of something Brennan Lee Mulligan once said. That was essentially, as a game master, you have to take into account that your world keeps moving even when the PCs aren't there. How did their actions in a town affect the people, the political climate, emotions of NPCs they interacted with, etc. And I think that's very. I don't think that's off topic at all. I think that's very related to this because that is. I mean, those moments didn't just affect the world, right? Like those moments affected the characters too. They had to have, right? Like interacting with an NPC, they like that affected the character, not just the town. So I think it is very on topic. So, but it's a good point that the world is moving. That it's not centered around the PCs. Although,
Yeah.
like on a practical level, it kind of has to be, obviously, right? Because the DM is a person, and they can't just, they're not omniscient. They can't make everything right. But you have to at least be able to simulate that the world keeps moving around the PCs.
Yeah, and I think that's why campaigns that have a home base or maybe even past that,
Mm-hmm.
a place that the characters come back to later, um, really really resonates. If we're talking about player engagement, I remember seeing a review for The Witcher 3.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I probably lose nerd points for this, but I could not get into the Witcher video
It
games.
took me a really long time to do it too, so
I
I
think
feel
it was
ya.
the movement.
Yeah, it's just something.
The
I don't know.
movement. I'm used to being able to turn like Dark Souls and just automatically face the way I always feel like I'm drunk if I can't do that. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
hobbling around. It reminds me of Red Dead when you come out of that bar.
Oh my God.
But the review was like, this town that you start out in, you see it so many times, and as you do things, as you resolve quests in it, you come back a month later in these games or days, and things have changed. And I think that the world progressing is one of the coolest things that a DM can do
Mm-hmm.
that does not lend itself well towards other mediums. The idea that yes, your character's actions and inaction, um, they make the world real. And I think as a DM or GM, our job is to make sure everybody's has fun, and also make sure that you're making the world feel like it's a real place. Not that it has to be realism, but that
Right.
there are consequences that aren't necessarily punishing, that NPCs that you relate with, and they come with you for 1 or 2 sessions and they learn from you. Yeah, they come back and maybe they're captain in the guard. And then if you come back again, maybe they're leading the guard a year later, and
Yeah.
you spike something in them, or maybe you start a new villain, or some people, maybe they're just trying to adjust to the things that you did to the town, that maybe they don't change and they struggle because of it.
Yeah.
Like adventurers are assholes. Like when you think about it,
Yeah.
they come in,
Yeah.
these douchebags, they have like the best equipment. Their
Yeah.
swords literally cost as much as your house. They go into the bar, they drop 10 gold on some ale because they don't want to do math for how much silver costs. And all of that money just trashes the economy. Like what there should be in D&D is a bunch of tourist towns from where these adventurers came in, trying to make money off of like, this is where so and so stood, and here's the statue. But like struggle, it should be like Las Vegas or something in some of these places, and the people there probably hate adventurers because now they have to make money off of them, but they also know that the adventurers are carrying money. Like it's no wonder people get stolen from so much in D&D. It's nobody is, if you carried around $400 in cash sticking out of your back pocket, like, yeah, people pay attention.
Like that's gonna be mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Huh.
Olivia, a campaign about the horrors of tourism.
Yeah, I mean, but for real, like, yeah, when you think about how an adventure is, it's just so it's kind of wrong. Like, yes, you've helped, but
Yeah.
I wonder about the implications of like, you save them from the goblins once, but you don't find the goblin's source. So you come back to the town the next time and they say, the goblins used to just raid us once a month. And yeah, they trashed our crops. They would take some things. But after those adventurers went into that cave and slayed half of them, they went to their goblin friends. And now we have like an onslaught happening here. And we've been hit harder in recent months than ever before in our lives. Like, because I mean, and maybe that's not the style of game you want to play with your players. You would want to talk to them before so they don't feel like, hey, that's not fair.
Yeah.
I saved them, right?
Yeah.
But it could be some really cool storytelling if they're on board for it.
I think it's interesting because sorry, Freeman, go ahead. You look.
No, I was just gonna say, just think of like all the superheroes and all the superhero films, how much city damage they actually they place on all the, they're doing. Yeah, they're saving the city from crime, whatever, the big bad guy. But you destroyed like a building. You broke several windows and several different skyscrapers and different businesses. Like there's no longer a hospital down the street. Like what at what cost?
Looking at you, Man of Steel.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why I love the opening to the newer Spider-Man movies in that first one where they show the cleanup crew with the Chitauri and like these low-scale bad guys like getting access to their guns. And they're like, hey, I guess we have lasers now because they left all these laser guns on the ground. Also, insurance companies are gonna, profit off of this a wild amount.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say was that because this is sort of not entirely on the same subject, but it is related because we're talking about as you were mentioning, Justice, you were talking about, I think earlier you mentioned about having consequences that are not necessarily punishing, and I think that's interesting because you also drew a line between like you don't necessarily want to go for realism, and I think that's a really good point because if you're talking about engagement, right, nothing will turn a player off more than having a consequence for their actions that does not fit their perception of what the game was going to be. And so that's why when thinking about the things like consequences and of actions or inactions and things like that, I try to think of it less in terms of realism, which I know tends to be the buzzword associated with that, and more in terms of internal consistency, right? Like the things, they have to match not only your world but also the style of game that you're playing, right? So like if you're playing like a grim dark Game of Thrones style campaign, there's a certain type of consequence that comes with actions or inactions there, as opposed to playing a game that's much more like, I don't know, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Different consequences there, right?
Yeah, for
and
sure.
So like I think that's such an interesting thing, right? The consequences have to fit not only the game, like the world that you're playing in, but also the style of game that you're playing. And that's why I think internal consistency is a term that better fits the description of this general thing that we're addressing here, right? Like it doesn't matter whether something is realistic. What matters is if it makes sense within the context of what you're doing.
I feel like you're giving me like the next month of my tweets.
I'm just reciprocating. I'm just reciprocating
like
here because you you gave me a whole lot to think about earlier, so I'm just giving back.
Yeah, like nothing. One of my very first character was a minotaur named Beethoven who wore this powdered wig, and he had a harpsichord on his back at all times that like was like a Casio piano set to the drums. So he would just be like, and it would like he would mix beats on it. But he carried a musket as his main weapon, and it took forever to reload, and it did not do a wild amount of damage. So I would wait like 2 rounds to reload that musket while everybody else was making their turns. And I was a new player, so I thought this was normal. If that happened to me now, I'd be so upset that this musket took 3 rounds to reload. I mean, I fired once and combat was over for my character. Like everything else I was doing was like, what's that movie that like the 52nd Regiment where he's showing them how to reload the musket. And he's like, it takes a minute. Well, a minute is 10 rounds in D&D. And my DM was being like somewhat generous. Like
Yeah.
he slashed the time by a third, but it was still a long time. And that was not my vision of my character.
Mm-hmm.
And when you take things from the players, when you punish them, like I get that inner, it's one thing if a player is testing you and they know that something is going to hit them badly and they really want to know what the trap does, but they don't want to get messed up by it. And then them making a decision that's an honest decision that could be really interesting for storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
and you impacting their character in such a negative way that they can no longer do what they want to do,
Right.
or lose a family member that their character has. And it's just so.
Yeah.
One thing that I definitely want to revisit when we get back to our home game that I was running for our college friends, Lucas,
Mm-hmm.
is something that one of our players had brought up, and I think this is a really interesting example of kind of like further along this idea, and also kind of like touching back on that notion of like a place that the players return to. I'd really like you guys to come back to that town that you started in at some
Mm-hmm.
point, because like there were a lot of interesting things I think that played out both with like the story of the NPCs there that you guys like came to know and interacted with, but then also one of the things that one of my players did is he asked me at one point, like, is there an orphanage in town? I was like, yeah. And he basically like set it up so that for the next several adventures, anytime that he found some gold or was paid something for what they had done, he would send it back. And I am so looking forward to like coming back and seeing the impact that what's just like a few gold, a pittance to an adventurer, like 10 gold pieces is, like you said, like that's half or a third of somebody's house, right? And so like seeing the effect that would have on the town that they had come to, which when they arrived was this like sort of dismal gray place that was beset by vampires, and like there's this weird like all kinds of strange magical phenomenon around, and like they solved a lot of that, but they also did things that weren't related to the horrifying like monsters that were attacking the town, that will have ramifications for what that place looks like down the road. So
Yeah. This is getting us very dangerously close to my rant about superheroes, which many of you have heard many times, and how superheroes aren't really heroes, they're just agents of the status quo, but we're not going to get into that. But but I do like what Olivia said, which is in chat, which is, wow, supporting their community, we have to stand. And I I agree. It's reframing what it means to be a hero. Go out and fighting monsters, or investing in the community, investing gold into social services. And um but yeah, no, like I think that those kinds of things are so interesting. And I do think I do agree with what you said earlier, Justice, about how that kind of um be like seeing the consequences of action or inaction play out is something that is really difficult to bring into media that's not tabletop RPGs, right? Because
Yeah.
on some level, I mean, I guess you can make an argument that you see it in television shows, but in television shows more often than not, the consequences of actions are seem like it was the consequences were decided before the actions were decided, right? Where
Yeah.
they're like, this is what we want to happen, how do we get from A to B? And it's less, it's sometimes it feels less like a logical progression of like, I did this, therefore this happened, and more like, we wanted this to happen, so we made this character do that, right? So I don't know, you can't really argue that. I think it's harder to argue that with television, but
It's interesting that you mentioned that. If we go back to The Office, I'm watching the commentaries, and there's this episode where a bat goes over Meredith's face. It's very popular clip,
yeah.
and in the scenes, like in this commentary, they're talking and with the director. And this is after they filmed part of this, but haven't started filming the new season. And somebody's like, "Yeah, a lot of people have asked me, at these events, they're like, is Meredith going to get rabies or something? Isn't that what happens?" And they're like, you need to wait and watch the next season. And it's interesting because when they wrote that episode, these writers they're writing episodes based on, it sounds like writing certain topics on a card, and they sit in a room and they like start pairing them up. So they say bat and a bunch of characters, and they're like, and Joss Whedon, who had at that time done Buffy the Vampire Slayer, was the director for that episode. He was actually really mad when he came in because he wanted to do The Office and have this kind of down to earth filming thing. And of course, Joss Whedon, who did Buffy, gets this episode about, it's got themes of vampires and there's a CGI bat in it. And he was like mad, and they had to explain that it was a total coincidence that this was the episode he was directing. But I don't think they knew that when they did that scene, that later she would have she would end up in a hospital and have rabies diagnosis. And it's cool to see them follow up on that sort of thing. And I wonder, as a DM, like if we're sitting in a room and writing down a bunch of ideas and throwing them at the wall, like what I usually have is when something interesting happens in my games, I'll write it down on a piece of paper during the session. And then afterwards, I have in my OneNote a landing page. And I have a big part that says to follow up on. And if something really interesting happened that was pivotal or didn't get resolved, I will put it on the follow up on. And when I go to do each session's prep, I will look at that first. And I'll say, where are we right now in Avernus? Oh, right. This person's dad has an infernal contract and owes 15 soul coins, but can't make them because they can't leave this place. Is this a good time to mention that again? Maybe not this time. And the next session, I'll see it again. And eventually things will line up that it's the perfect moment to bring that back in. And I think that having that wall of things is just really helpful. And it's cool to see, what's that consequence?
Yeah.
And also to see bats flying at characters' faces. Very appropriate if you do a Curse of Strahd game.
Right. Yeah. The bat swarm definitely does have a stat block in the book. So.
That would be funny. An Office themed one shot and people don't realize it.
Oh my god, that would be incredible.
There's a vampire somewhere in the office and it turns into a bat and it bites somebody and you get lycanthropy.
Oh my god, that would be
lycanthropy. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be such an incredible reference in or homage in your work. That would be so good. I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to think. Sorry, there was something that I was thinking earlier that I feel like is relevant to this, and I'm trying to remember what it was.
I know I tend to do that same thing like as a player. Like when I'm a player in a game, I a lot of times like when something happens, like I will make notes for myself that it happened and be like, I want to, and like I'm one of those people that likes to take notes in multiple colors, and so like when stuff like that happens in my notebook, I'll take a note of it in a different color and then like circle the little bullet points so that I like when I'm looking, like when we're recapping and getting ready for the next session, I'm like, oh yes,
yeah,
right. So because I like to hold like these responses to moments like that kind of in my head and just be like, when would this be good, and just like kind of see when I can play out like relationships with NPCs or other characters, like when good moments for that to come up will be along. Because sometimes people will just like say the most interesting or wild things in character. I'm like, oh, it would like really halt the flow of the game to address this right now, but that's really interesting and I definitely want to later. Like,
yeah. How do you know when a good time is to bring that in? Like, how do you make that that call as a GM?
I think
when is it ready?
For me, I was reading chat, so I semi lost a little track just a little bit of the specifics of what we're talking about, but I think I got the gist. But for me, it's a matter of basically just deciding whether or not that is something that is going to interfere with something else that's happening, right? Like the flow of something else that's happening. I'm trying to think of, there was an example recently in Infinite Horizon, and I'm trying to remember. Oh, I know what it was. And this is, here we go. Here we are, me behind the scenes calling myself out for a thing that I did during a live stream TTRPG. There was an episode recently where at the end there was a really, really nice button to tie up the episode on, but instead of that, I instead of just sort of allowing that moment to carry us out of that episode, I decided that I wanted to shoehorn in something, an interaction between two characters that I felt hadn't interacted enough recently. But it was definitely something that I wanted to happen, but because it was something that hadn't happened in such a long time, I wanted it to happen now, and like I couldn't get that out of my brain. Like I needed this to happen here, and it was just not the right time, and it did not work. It did not accomplish what I wanted it to accomplish, and it also undercut the other moment that was taking place. And so that's an example of how not to do that, right? Of when you don't do that. So for me, it's a matter of to answer your question, thinking about is this thing that we're wanting to address, is this going to undercut the main thing that's happening right now? And if it is, maybe this is a thing that we wait on. And if it isn't, then I think how can it best serve that, or work in tandem with what's going on right now? And because sometimes you've got those moments in a game where you want it to be a situation where when it rains it pours, right? Whereas like they're dealing with a problem, but then another problem that's not related pops up, and then maybe another one pops up, and sometimes you want that, but sometimes it just doesn't work. And where these things are actually just working against each other. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think your instinct is good though. I mean, someone who regularly wonders if these two characters have had a moment together, I think that's a good GM check engine light to have. Is, you know, are these two characters growing apart, and is it something with the players, or is it just that their characters haven't had a good setup? And you know, what could be interesting about those two? Because there's always those two characters that you have in a TV show that you never really see do anything together, and then they have that one episode and you're like, wow, it's a this person and this person episode. You're like, they are really weird together, but it kind of works. And I think that's cool in D&D. We have a character in our session now who's our table, who's he's played since first edition D&D.
Oh wow.
He plays this forge cleric who's very good, and they're in Avernus, and he has this like violence about him that you can tell, like he as a player hasn't acknowledged it, but now he's starting to in character, and it's kind of interesting seeing that. But there's 5 people at the table, and the other 2 pairs have relationships, not like relationship, but their characters are tied pretty well. So when he pairs up with someone, it's always really interesting to see where it will go, because you can tell that they're not used to each other. And in that way, they make really interesting decisions a lot of the time.
And I'm, as just in general, not even outside the context of TTRPGs, just like it could be food, it could be genres, whatever. I like weird combinations, like the things that you're like, that would never work unless, right? Like those are my favorite things. Like we were talking a little bit earlier when we were talking about like
the
food,
the
and
pomegranate and walnut.
So
good. Yes, kebab torch.
Yeah, exactly.
We're bringing it back.
It's a wonderful combination. But yeah, nobody is thinking, wow, you know, it'd be great with these mixed nuts, some pomegranate. Like nobody does that, except maybe Iranians.
Right,
And they're
yeah.
right. It's amazing. Super interesting.
It's interesting. Also, drink for pre-show topic coming up at the end of the show. Like I feel like that's a Ramblemancy stance at this point.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I was sitting here the whole time. Like when you asked that question, it took me a minute to come up with an answer. But I was like, I feel I cook a lot, and so like the answer to me is like, sometimes when you're cooking, you'll be making it, and you'll taste it or you smell it or something like this needs something. Right. And then it's open the spice cupboard time, or like check what like fresh herbs or something that you have stored in the fridge, and then see what you can find to balance it out. And for me, it's kind of looking for that moment in game where it's like, when will this be like the little like something that makes this little dish that we're making together like truly shine. Like that's kind of what it is for me. It's like I was trying to describe, when it feels right isn't a very like comprehensive answer, but like isn't a great answer, but like looking for those places where like it enhances either it has the weight to stand on a time when it has the weight to stand on it, the space to stand on its own, or
When there's something missing.
Yeah, when there's something missing.
It's cool.
I
Shel Silverstein's The Missing Piece, one of my favorite books, children's book.
I wanted to ask so Freeman, because I know there's been many times, because there's the other side of this, right? The other side of it is the player side of this, right? And Freeman, most of your experience with TTRPGs has been as a player, and so I'm really curious.
All of it.
Right? Yeah, that's true. Yeah, all of it. So I'm curious because there's been so many times, like, because you and I have played a lot of games together, where you have you've taken it upon yourself to make those moments happen, right? To take like this sort of side thing that is not really relevant to what's going on, but you make it relevant. And I'm curious, like when you do that, I mean, do you what's kind of, this is maybe not the right way to ask this question because it's very general, but I was thinking in terms of like what do you think about like when you're bringing those moments up? Like, do you think about the same kind of thing? Because I'm actually very curious about that. I don't have enough experience as a player in a game to really know for sure. So
I'm just trying to think of an example.
Yeah, I know there's been some, not necessarily recently, but like in our home game, I know there's
Like
been
in the home
moments,
game for sure. And I'm trying to remember so I can kind of spark my memory.
Well, then make it maybe hypothetical then, like in a hypothetical situation.
Well, man, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I put a blindfold on and I just wherever I end up is pretty cool. And that I don't know how I did it, but man, I mean, I honestly don't know how. I don't think I have a proper answer because like I don't think I have a method. I think I just bumble through things and it's amazing. It somehow is just great. And sometimes it's not, but yeah, I don't really know if I have an answer for that, like a good one.
Yeah, well, that's fair, and I imagine it's probably different for every player, right? Knowing when the moment is to bring up whatever this side thing is, right? Like I imagine it's different per player and per situation.
And I mean, there's this asymmetry of information that the player has with the GM. That's why it's so critical to talk with your GM. Is you don't know when that moment's like for the player. They're showing up every week and they have no idea. They don't know what's on the other side of this door. There's some degree of foresight you might be able to have as a player. You know, we're going here to get this. You don't know who's going to be there. You don't know how that person's going to react. DMs love to surprise people. So you know, it's in your best interest to, if you have a moment that you want to play, if you have a character that you want to role play with, is to say, hey, I need a moment for this. I'm struggling to show this side of my character, or I've always seen my character, you know, making this suit of armor out of this rare metal and, you know, returning home as this, you know, maybe it's cultural for that character. Maybe, you know, it's this moment they want to have, but they have no way to realize that because they're going to drag the whole group there. There's feelings of, you know, is this going to feel natural for the group? Am I being a burden? Will this ever even happen? So if you talk to your GM about it, like your GM is probably going to be like, yeah, that sounds super cool. Let's start planting the seeds for that. And yeah, it might take 10 sessions to get back home, but the moment is so much more worth it, especially if you know it's coming as a player, you can prepare for it. I mean, I like to write monologues and not monologues. I like to write voice lines for my characters for certain scenarios so that they can look like a badass when those things happen. They're like, wow, that was really well composed. It's like, yeah, thanks. That's one of 50 that I have here on my computer.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I do have like a few one-liners that I've like taken and I've written down for later uses every once in a while for sure.
Catchphrase, giving your character a catchphrase that happens over time. That's super cool.
Single favorite D&D character I have ever played was a College of Eloquence bard. He started as Lore College, and then when College of Eloquence came out, I switched him to that because it fits so well. But his whole shtick wasn't like, I mean, he did like regular bard things. He played instruments and sang and stuff like that, but he very seldom did that in combat. And his whole shtick for like doing magic was like, my what if for the character was, what if the narrator from Bastion just like narrated things into existence, and that was a character in Dungeons and Dragons. And so what I would do at the table during combat or anytime I had to cast a spell is while other people were having their turns, I'd figure out, okay, who am I going to inspire? And then I'd write something out, and then I'd figure out like what spell am I going to cast and who am I going to target and how does that look? And then I would write out like essentially this narration from this character who was essentially just describing the flow of combat happening and in doing so reshaping it. And that was my favorite character that I've ever played because I just enjoyed making everyone else at the table feel extra super badass. But like writing out what was happening with very like evocative language and then saying that as my character's spells was, I feel like, a really good way to immerse at least me and I hope everyone else at the table in what was happening in the moment.
I want to address this thing because I was thinking about this when she said it, but Olivia in chat said when Lucas goes, anyone want to have a scene? Bless him. First of all, you're welcome, and I'm glad that I have a group of players that are good at taking that up and just running with it. But I also think that it's interesting because this is sort of an answer to my own question, I guess, about players bringing other things in, which. I'm thinking, for me, when I run a game, and I don't know that this is true for every GM. I'm sure it's not. Few things are, but I always feel like the things that the players do. This is sort of in response to what you were saying, Justice, about the asymmetry of information, right? I don't always want to tip my hand and show my players, yes, this is what's coming, and once we're through that, or before we do that, then you can bring in this scene of yours. I don't always want to do that because sometimes I'm very passionate about the fact that surprise is not the only tool in a GM's toolbox. You should communicate with your players as much as possible. But sometimes surprise is a tool that you want to use, and so you don't necessarily want to tip your hand. So the way to compensate, or the way I compensate for the players not having the information that they need in order to best judge whether or not it's time to bring something up, is usually by just letting what the players choose to do, the scenes they choose to have, and the things they choose to bring up, letting those take... or letting the plot, so to speak, take a back seat to those things. So taking those moments, and in a way this is sort of the same thing, right? Having that moment as the GM where you're like, will players taking a scene here disrupt things, or will it be okay, or will it enhance things? And choosing that moment to say, hey everybody, grab the spotlight if you want it. And so I think that's a good way of, at least that's how I combat that asymmetry of information that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I think, and thanks Olivia for bringing that up, because that actually made me think about that specific thing and ways to sort of get around that, which I think is interesting. I also saw Remy. Hello, Remy. Remy said, because John is here, I can't spoil too much, but speaking to what Justice is saying, for my home Storm King's Thunder campaign, something that happened in last session that one player wanted to do but was worried about addressing it in session, but loved it as a way to work in this idea into what I had planned. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you'll always tell better stories when your players work something in with them, like, because if you have 4 people at your table, you've just increased your immersion by 25% than if you hadn't, integrated whatever they wanted to do in there from the get-go. I mean, I asked my players, Devin, it's actually Devin's birthday today. Ooh. So if you're on Twitter, go wish Devin from D4 happy birthday.
Oh.
But he says that at the end of every, he and Dustin. I don't know why that took me a second. But they will always ask their players 2 questions at the end of every week. And it's, what is your character's long-term goal? and what's their short-term goal. And then at the end of each of those questions, you ask, and how has it changed? Some weeks I get the same thing. It's, oh, my goals are the same as they were last week. My character is still looking for this. They still want to do this. But then after something will happen that's interesting, or something that just kind of changes their perspective a little bit. They realize that something wasn't the way they thought it was. Something happens that's personal to the character. It's interesting to see how those goals change. And based on the way those goals are each week, I can structure things in the session that I know they're going to be invested in, that I'm not necessarily giving anything away. If I know that they really want to catch up to this bad guy and stick it to him, well, then anything that puts them back on that course is going to be something that character is interested in. And I can surprise within that box. And I think improvising within a box is way easier than having a sandbox in front of you. I mean, they
Yeah.
wrote boxes. That was a terrible, that's a terrible example. But instead
Yeah.
of having every possibility at your fingertips, knowing that
And
here are my parameters, it has to lead to this person because that's what they want.
Yeah.
How can I surprise them? How can I put cool situations in front of them that also advance that plot?
That
Um,
goes back to what you were talking about earlier with like with the exercises, right? Like the character warm-ups, like the role-playing warm-ups and those sorts of things, because those are basically just the the player's side of that. Because like what you were just saying is kind of more the like the GM side. The player side of that is a little bit like picking those details about themselves and their characters, and that's kind of their smaller box within which to improvise, right? It gives them, it's basically like giving you props, right? Like on, I think about like Whose Line Is It Anyway, right? Where they give them, they're like here's a box of things, now do it like this is the basic idea of the scene, and then they improvise within those parameters rather than just sort of improvise a scene, right? Like, which I'm sure those people are brilliant and they could do, but but it's very different having something to ground you, you know. Oh, are you muted?
Yeah, like oh, I was just unmute me.
No, I thought I saw Justice muted, but
no,
Oh,
no, you should go. You
Go
should
for
go
it,
next.
Phoenix.
I
was gonna
was
say,
muted, but you should go. I'm interested in what you have to say.
I was just gonna say, like, even like when you're getting ready for like a, actually all of improv classes are just exercises for the improv.
Mm-hmm.
So it, right away you're working within a parameter. You have like a location, a place, a thing that you're working towards, say for a scene, or you're just playing like a fun game where like you're on a road trip where there's like 4 chairs set up and you pick up a hitchhiker and their job is to make you as uncomfortable as possible. I don't know, I'm just trying to remember like all these improv classes I took early on, like in middle school, high school, and it's, you are working kind of within a, not limitation, but like it's an exercise. You're working within that exercise, but you're not thinking about what the exercise is. It's very strange. I don't know what my point
No,
was, but
that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Like that,
Yeah.
it's basically just putting those constraints on yourself. Like I feel the same way with writing. Like if I'm just like go out and write a, like I like to write poetry from time to time, and it's like write a poem is very, it's so much harder than saying write a poem about insert thing here,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's so much harder to do.
And I think, interestingly, there's kind of the flip side of it that too much of a box can be really
Yes.
difficult to improvise in. And I think that's where being a player is really hard sometimes because the DM, if they're world building is tough. Starting from scratch every time, it stinks. I don't like it. I know some people like it. I like somebody to go, here's the world, do what you want in it. And I will make the world from that framework. But when you're a player and you played a character for, 8 months or something, you are burdened by every decision they've ever made. Sure, they should be dynamic, but dynamic changes happen slowly. If a character makes a choice that isn't gradual, that wasn't the way, what isn't consistent with how they've been, it feels like you've broken character. It feels like you're playing you instead of a character, which is fine. Some groups you just want to be a fighter and you just want to be a barbarian, but in others that baseline is important to the other characters. It's like it's trust, it's performance together, and it's interesting to think about how all of those role play warm-ups, in a way, how they do help you. they also make things challenging in some respects, that if you lose sight of how your character makes a decision and you get to that point, there have been moments in campaigns I've played in where, you know, the GM will lean back and they'll be like, are you sure you want to do that? And the player will say, yeah, because this, and the answer will sort of make sense, but you can tell the table is like a little taken back from it. And afterwards, you can, unless it really goes well, you can tell it sits with the GM, you can tell it sits with some of the players. And it's because if this was a TV show we were watching, the forums would go crazy the next day and they'd be like, why did this character do that? That's so weird. They've never done something like that before.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard as a player because, yeah, every decision you've ever made is going to roll into your character, and some things are going to be familiar, but there's always going to be a moment well, not always, but sometimes there's going to be moments in campaigns where you're faced with a decision that you don't know what your character would do, but you might have enough historically to make the decision that your character probably would make. And I think that's hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I actually think we're at the end of our time, so I think that's actually a pretty solid note to end on, really. Like that's very good. We ended up staying, I think this might be a Ramblemancy first, right? Where we've wandered fully off the topic while somehow still being on the topic.
It's lovely.
Yeah, we wandered a lot within our topic,
Yeah.
but we didn't actually ever wander off of it, which is maybe if not a first, it's been a long time.
Yeah. So
we all remember the butt pun episode.
Okay, but that's not what that was. That was just a full-on derailment. Let's call it what it was. That was just a derailment. For like 20 minutes, we just went.
Wasn't that just the rest of the episode?
That wasn't the rest of the episode, but it did make it so that the rest of the episode had to just be whatever, anything else, because we just could not get back on topic. So, Gemini, do not start this right now.
Uh-oh. I was actually thinking about butt puns, so probably a good time to end.
I see you, Gemini.
Very good.
You have a sword now. You're not allowed to do. Wait.
That's a
Amethyst
good
was
one.
the one who started it, so never mind.
Yeah, no, Amethyst also has a sword. She was just enabling me.
Anyway, well, Justice, thank you for coming and hanging out with us and for chatting. This was such a fun and enlightening discussion. Like, I have so many ideas right now just buzzing around in my head.
This is my note card of the ideas.
Perfect.
This is gonna save me, because in the morning I'm not gonna have to be thinking, what do I tweet about today? Why did I put this off until the last minute?
Yeah,
I have something here. So thank you this was a very productive work session.
Yeah, it's always great whenever you do any kind of like work with content online. It's always great when you can make one thing work for multiple things that you have to do.
I was thinking about it while we were talking. I was like, I should go on more shows. I got a lot of material here. I was like, this is a really productive hour and a half.
Well,
I need to do this.
You're always welcome back here. So if you find yourself on a Friday having procrastinated on what you're going to tweet about, like, let me know and we'll get you on. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us as well, for having your own conversations in chat. Sorry we weren't able to get to a lot of the stuff that was in there, but I did see a lot of really cool comments and discussions. So thank you, everybody, for those. As I said at the beginning of the episode, Ramblemancy is coming to YouTube. Our backlog is going up first in 5 to 8 episode chunks every week. That's Mondays. And we'll be doing that until we're current, and then you'll be able to see the most recent episode every Monday after that. So, be on the lookout for those. Our most recent ones included such guests as Olivia, who's been in chat this evening, talking about fandoms and appreciation of content. We had Lily with Ramble Fancy, where the entire episode concept was just, we dress up. That was it. That was the whole episode. Mm-hmm. And of course, our chat with Alpha Dean from Cypher Unlimited on just general gaming stuff. And of course, the Cypher system, because you don't have Alpha Dean on your show to talk about gaming and not talk about the Cypher system. So, so those are all up, and you can check those out. So thank you everybody for everything else. Definitely go to the Discord if you're not already on it. It's a great place to go and keep up to date with everything that's going on. Whenever we have new announcements or things like that, it's the first place that we go with our announcements and updates to the different things like that. So, yeah, thank you everybody once again. Justice, actually, if you want, go feel free to tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, my name is Justice Arman. You can find me on Twitter at Justice Arman. Not on Instagram like that. Somebody took that name. I gotta find them. No. My website is also the same, www.justicearman.com. I don't blog on there as much as I used to, but I do add my roleplay warm-ups to a pinned blog post there pretty regularly. And then my portfolio and all there is on that as well. If you want to support me on DM's Guild or anything like that, always appreciated.
Fantastic. So yeah, go follow Justice if you aren't already. He often has really cool prompts and ideas and just things to think about and great D&D and tabletop RPG takes.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we will hopefully see you this coming Tuesday for our continuation of Into Deep, our Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign. I have to stop and think about it every time.
Me too.
Every time I have to stop and think about it if I've said all the words in the correct order. Waterdeep Dragon Heist. There we go.
At 4 p.m.
At 4 p.m. Pacific time. Infinite Horizon, our Cypher System Sci-Fi Supers RPG show, will return on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And of course, this show, Ramblemancy, will be back a week from now, 7 p.m. Pacific time on Friday, with our guest next week, Annabelle K., an artist and streamer who has long been adjacent to our community. That we're gonna have Annabelle on to talk about something. It's been so long since
Bringing stories to life.
Bringing
That
stories
was the
to
one.
life.
Thank you. Yeah.
Animals excellent. She has a background in film and TV, and she streams art and is a huge fantasy nerd. So
yeah,
that's gonna be good.
It'll be a good time. So
yeah. So
which plans to Discord just as we were making these announcements, and I haven't that well. So
great. So we'll see you hopefully on Tuesday for Into Deep. But if not, we'll see you the next time you decide to come roll with us. Good night and good zone, everybody.